All right, man, peace. You know, if I was going to compare Scottie Pippen to anything, he would be the middle child who excelled above the older and the younger child, but still felt out of place because he was just the middle child. Scottie's never going to get the credit that he most likely deserves as being one of the top 50 NBA greatest players. In my view, he'll always be one of the top 50 NBA's most greatest players because he's without a doubt the greatest defensive small forward in the history of the NBA. And I'm not sure if there's a close second. I don't think people realize how great of a defensive player he was. He oftentimes would guard anywhere from the opposing team's point guard to the opposing team's power forward. And he was known for being such a nuisance, such a pest, and such a great defensive player that he could change the flow of an entire series. I remember in the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals, the Bulls had him guard Mark Jackson. Mark Jackson, for those of you who don't know he's not just an announcer. He was at one time one of the NBA's most cerebral point guards. And Scottie Pippen, defending Mark Jackson in the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals, slowed him down and slowed their offense down to such a degree that it was one of the main reasons why the Bulls were able to defeat the Pacers in that series. And everybody knows about the defensive job that he did on Magic Johnson in the 91 Finals, where he was able to spell Jordan. Contrary to many of the myths, no, he did not start to guard Magic Johnson exclusively after Game 1. He and Jordan still shared the duties of defending Magic Johnson after Game 1. It was pretty much 50-50. But many of Michael Jordan's naysayers love to talk about how Scottie took over the defensive duties of Magic Johnson and he shut Magic down. Nobody is ever going to shut Magic Johnson down. He's an all-time great player. But what Scottie did was he slowed him down because he was such a pest. He was very long, and he could exert 100% energy on the defensive end because he got most of his offensive points in transition. They expected Jordan to provide anywhere from 30 to 35 points in a half-court set. Scottie did not have that type of stress on him. He was pretty much the Klay Thompson of the Bulls. Now, why am I going on this long soliloquy about Scottie Pippen? Because Scottie's extremely competitive. You can't be that great defensively without being extremely competitive. And ESPN has decided to give him his own segment in the aftermath of Kobe Bryant getting his own segment called Details. Now Scottie Pippen is going to show many of the players around the NBA how to defend many of the current NBA's most notable offensive stars. And he's going to start out with Mr. James Harden, who's the perfect player to start out with because it seems like nobody can figure out how to guard him, despite the fact that he looks like he does the same thing in every offensive possession. So anyway, Scottie's going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in. As you can see, just in that very brief clip, he was guarding everybody. He was guarding Magic Johnson. He was guarding Bernard King. He guarded Larry Bird to the best of his ability anyway. He guarded Mark Aguirre. All the top players of that era, Scottie Pippen would guard them, and he was the best defensive small forward of his era. In regards to offense, there were too many great offensive small forwards in the late 80s into the 90s to put him at the top of that list. But when it came to transition offense, Scottie Pippen was probably the best transitional offense player in the NBA in regards to his ability to both lead the fast break and run the lane when he did not have the basketball on a fast break.
What makes James Harden so difficult to stop is his ball handling ability. He has the ability to penetrate, stop on a dime, and pull up a jump shot. But there's a way to stop him.
Well, it doesn't help that the NBA allows him to do a cha-cha-cha after he finishes going through the legs 5,000 times. It's unbelievable to me that they allow players now to step back and then step back again without dribbling the basketball.
I'm going to tell you how. I think people push him to his right because I know that they fear that he can beat them with his left.
Now, you heard what Scottie Pippen said. He said that the defenders should stop forcing James Harden right. Well, I understand what Scottie's saying, but this NBA is so different because back in the 90s, the scouting report would say to push a certain player left or to push him right because he didn't finish as well going right, or he didn't finish as well going left, or he could not pass going left, things of that nature. But now in this NBA, it's very difficult to push the great offensive players in a certain direction because the offensive systems are set up to have shooters adjacent to the great offensive player so that even if he gets double teamed, he can quickly kick out for three.
But in this situation right here, I mean, you see James Harden get the ball, and you see Paul George just really never get in front of him.
Well, it seems to be because whatever their defensive set was, they were trying to funnel James Harden into Carmelo Anthony. The problem is that Carmelo Anthony is just a turnstile. That's all his ass is. I mean, James Harden basically got on the subway for free. He didn't have to pay with a Metro card because Carmelo's just a damn turnstile. Let me rewind it back.
But in this situation right here, I mean, you see James.
Now look at this. It's obvious that Paul George, the defensive scheme is to funnel James right. He's supposed to funnel him into Carmelo. Now look at Carmelo bum ass.
Harden get the ball, and you see Paul George.
Carmelo act like he playing defense and just step to the side.
George just really never get in front of him.
And see, the difficult part about Scottie Pippen breaking down defense is that he comes from an era where the players were trained to guard their man one-on-one. The defensive schemes were not as intricate as they are today because so many of these players don't have the conditioning to play both offense and defense. So they're pretty much playing man zones. Back in Scottie's era, Scottie would follow you over the pick, under the pick. He would guard you all the way to the basket. That's just how they played back then. So it's going to be difficult for Scottie to understand why they're quote-unquote allowing James to do these things. It's really the defensive schemes are allowing these players to do what they do.
I think you have to attack the basketball. You have to attack the ball handler. Don't let the ball handler attack you. You got to stop him by committee. I mean, someone got to stop the ball. James Harden gets all the way to the three-point line before someone even addresses the fact that he's pushing the ball up, and somebody got to guard him in the backcourt. You can't allow James Harden to push the ball up with 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, even if he don't want to take this shot, they still got over 20 seconds.
That's because a lot of these defenders are scared of him. They're scared of getting crossed up, or they're scared of him making a three-pointer in their face. And I mean, at the end of the day, James Harden is a 43% shooter. There's nothing to be that scared of. More likely than not, he's going to miss, especially if you play him physically. The issue is that so many of these defenders today, they're playing defense with their hands instead of their feet. So they have their hands all on James Harden, or they have their arm impeding his progress. So all he does is jerk both his arms up so that he can get the foul call. Let me rewind this back a little bit.
Can allow James Harden to push the ball up with 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, even if he don't want to take this shot, they still got over 20 seconds to execute their offense.
See, with a defensive scheme like that, back in the 90s, they would have had their center make sure that they sprint back on defense so that whoever's guarding someone like a James Harden could pressure him for 94 feet. And even if James was to beat them, they would still have to deal with the big man at the basket. But in today's NBA, where even your 5-man is assigned to spread the floor and be out by the three-point line in the corner, if you pressure a person like James Harden 94 feet and he beats you, he's going to have a dunk at the rim. And even if Clint Capella is there, once he beats his man and Clint Capella's man comes over to help, all he's going to do is lob up for a dunk.
I'm not a big fan of switching a big to a scoring guard. Guys don't try to throw his ball handling off. And so he's very comfortable against a defender because he feels like he has the defender at his mercy all the time. Even if it's a switch, you have to force him to take a step back. And
I understand what Scottie's saying, but my issue with watching a lot of these defensive reels is the help man. I mean, the help man has to do something. Take a foul, put a body on him, get a block shot. It's one thing for him to beat one guy, but for him to be beating 3 guys to the basket, that's ridiculous. Let me rewind this back.
Now, defender because he feels like
I mean, look at the Utah Jazz. What is Jay Crowder doing?
He has the defender at his mercy.
Look, Jay Crowder is supposed to step up to take the charge right here. Look at what he does.
It's mercy all the time. Even if it's a
look at that Ole defense.
The switch. You have to force him to take a step back and not allow him to turn the corner. And in this situation, you got to make James Harden work.
What is Gibson doing? What is he, like a chaperone? They going on a school trip? You want to make sure he gets to the basket safe? What the fuck was that?
Allow him to turn the corner. And
now look at this shit. This is what you call acting defense. He's acting like he's playing defense. Only thing he's doing is he's chaperoning him. He's like, okay, James, let me make sure you get to the basket safe.
In this situation, you got to make James Harden work.
Andrew Wiggins is supposed to help there.
We've seen in the playoffs in the past that if you take him out of his comfort zone, he'll quit.
Now, did you hear what Scottie Pippen stated there at the end? He said, if you take James Harden out of his comfort zone, he will quit. That's one of the main reasons why I call him James Hardhead, and that's why I state that this playoff run will be a referendum on James Hardhead. If he does what he's supposed to do, which is at the very least go out in the Western Conference Finals, no less than 6 games, and he does not make any egregious mistakes in that 6-game loss to the Golden State Warriors, I will stop calling him James Hardhead. But until then, that is what I'm going to call him, because there is no excuse for the flameout that he had in last year's playoffs against the San Antonio Spurs.
Wow.
Whoa, great piece from Scottie there, and some significant laying down of the gauntlet at the end.
Now, did you hear what Byron Scott stated? He said that was the James Harden of yesteryears. That is his response to Scottie Pippen's assertion that you can get James Harden to quit. Well, Scottie Pippen is from that era of the 1990s where they believed that once a quitter, always a quitter. Floyd Mayweather has also touched on that sentiment that if a guy quits once, he'll quit again, especially if you can plant some doubt in his mind. But this is a different era. This is a different style of basketball. You can't just impose your will physically on a team like the Bulls could back in the day. Back in the 90s, especially in the late 90s, that second three-peat team, they would literally wear teams down with their defense. They were not an explosive offensive team in the late 90s, especially by the playoffs. That was an older Bulls team that oftentimes by the playoffs, they would grit and grind their way to victories. They would win games 88-82 and things of that nature. Jordan would score 30 points, 30 out of the 88 points, and they would just wear teams down physically. Now in this era, it's all run and gun. So this era more fits the mindset of a James Harden, and he does not have to worry about facing a San Antonio Spurs team with a healthy Kawhi Leonard that would have pushed them to the brink mentally had he been forced to face a team like that. I also would have loved to have seen them against the New Orleans Pelicans. I think that they would have beat New Orleans, but I would have liked to have seen them against New Orleans as opposed to Golden State. Golden State pretty much, they're like Bruce Lee. They're like water. They're going to adapt to whatever they're facing. That's why it's going to be very interesting to see Golden State against the Houston Rockets, presumably.
Well, I was like, okay, all right. I was following along. That last one was like, whoa.
Scottie Pippen doesn't play, guys. James Harden.
No, Scottie don't give a damn, especially if he got some weed and his wife done left him for Future again. He's pissed off. He'll say anything. Scottie be there smoking and just, I can get James Harden to quit because he's a bitch, just like that man that my wife left me for. So James Harden, kiss my ass.
Harden leading the way in player efficiency rating, trails only LeBron in scoring. So do you guys think Scottie's right and there is a way to stop him? Or do you think what apparently the rest of the league has settled on, which is that he is unguardable right now?
Man, I'll tell you, I think he's unguardable the same way Steph Curry's unguardable, the same way KD and LeBron are unguardable. That's our game is that. Offensive players that it's hard to say, I'm going to guard you one-on-one, I'm going to stop you. But the beauty of basketball, coach, is that it's a game of individual brilliance within the collective. How do we stop them and not how do I stop him?
Yeah.
Well, there are some great one-on-one players today. There's no doubt about that. But there were also great one-on-one players back in the 80s and 90s. There's no one-on-one player today that is any better than Bernard King was. There's no one-on-one player today that is any better than Isaiah Thomas was when Isaiah Thomas got on his role, or Joe Dumars when he got on his role. And, of course, Michael Jordan. Everybody knows about him one-on-one. Larry Bird, etc. Alex English. When those brothers got flowing, there was nothing that you could do. So the issue with the NBA right now is that because oftentimes all 5 players on the floor can shoot from 3, it's very difficult to stop the more prominent one-on-one players in the league because the coaches know that they can get those isolation plays going. And once you get a James Harden, a Kevin Durant, a Steph Curry flowing, that opens up three-point shots for the other four members of the team on the court with them at that time.
Yeah, I think he is unguardable. Like Amit said, and I think you have to do it by committee. You can't do it with one guy. He's got to see two guys almost every time down the floor, if not two and a half. I love the way Scottie broke it down. There was only one other guy I would love to hear his take on how to guard James Harden, and that would be Michael Cooper. Because Michael Cooper had that same type of length, that athleticism, and Michael feared nobody.
Michael Cooper was a very good defensive reserve guard for the Lakers back throughout the 80s, but he wouldn't have been able to do shit with James Harden. James Harden would have had too much girth for him. Just like Larry Bird and Michael Jordan, those guys used to feast on Michael Cooper. Nothing against that brother. He was a great defensive player, but there's nothing that you can do with the elite level offensive players in the NBA. You really just have to hope that they're off. And James would have had a little bit too much width for Michael Cooper. He would have just put that shoulder on Michael and moved him out the way.
So it would have been interesting to see his take on how would he guard James Harden. But I agree.
And don't get me wrong, Michael Cooper would have had his moments. Great defenders are going to have their moments against great offensive players. But overall, the offensive player is always going to have the edge because he knows where he's going and you don't. Unless you studied the scouting reports so much and you study film so much that you know where they're going based on their dribble moves or how they're holding their head or how they're holding the basketball or where they're placing their feet. Elite level defenders, they can tell where someone's going to go based off of those signals. But even still, I mean, as great as Michael Cooper was, I mean, I saw Larry Bird light up Dennis Rodman for something like 35, 37 points in Game 7 in the 87 Eastern Conference Finals. There's nothing that you can do against elite level scorers once they get in their zone.
I agree with you. He is unguardable, but that's why basketball is a team sport.
Right.
If you're trying to do that one-on-one, you
can't do it.
Can't do it.
You can't guard him
That's
one-on-one.
why Daryl Morey constructed the Rockets roster the way he did, because if you do team sort of net around James Harden, they got a lot of shooters. So far, the Pelicans...
But anyway, that's it on Scottie Pippen's expose of James Harden. I would have loved to have seen Scottie guard James Harden, because I'm not sure that there were too many players, even in that era, who liked to shoot off the dribble like a James Harden does now. Now, a player back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, who was a dynamic scorer, who played very similar to James Harden, except he was not quite as quick a foot as Chris Mullin. He also was left-handed. He also could shoot off the dribble. He was very adroit with either hand, could finish very well in traffic with either hand, but once again, he was not quite the athlete of James Harden. And he also would get buckets on anybody. Chris Mullin was another person who could fill it up. And, once again, when you have elite level defenders go against great offensive players, both sides are going to have their moments, but usually the offensive player is going to win out. But anyway, peace.